Come on. Oh. Wrong camera. Hello. Oh, I also don't have my camera software on. That's why that camera didn't work. Too much technology. Too much technology. Too many things to turn on. Too much to get ready for. So sorry I'm late, everyone. Hello. My name is Cameron Cowan. Welcome to the Cameron Journal Newshour. If you don't know who I am, I'm the Cameron in the Cameron Journal. Every week I come together and do a wrap-up of news and headlines that is really quite exciting. We have a lot of fun. We talk about news narratives, all this type of thing. If you want to follow me online, you can catch me on social media. I'm at Cameron Cowan on X/Twitter and Instagram, and Cameron Journal on TikTok. I'm also on LinkedIn, fun things like that. I'm even on Pinterest, which is a lot more fun. Yeah, and obviously you can find all those links at CameronJournal.com. I want to remind everyone to sign up for the newsletter, CameronJournal.com/newsletter. Every Saturday you get a wrap-up of the week's headlines and everything from the Cameron Journal, including this show, the interviews, the living joke, everything delivered to your inbox every Saturday. It's great. I also wanted to I also want to thank all my Cameron Journal Plus subscribers and also remind people to sign up. It's only $5 a month. I think it's $50 for the year. If you want to support this journalism and this coverage, Cameron Journal Plus memberships are the best way to do so. Alternatively, though, if you don't want to start a new account, and I get it, and you're already on Substack, which we love, I also have a version of the Cameron Journal on Substack with select content, including this show, couple video, the interview videos, the newsletter, all that's on Substack. So CameronJournal.substack.com. It's easy to subscribe there. And you don't have to start a new account or anything. And it's already there. And it will also be delivered to your inbox. So wherever you want to be, the Cameron Journal is there. We have a lot to talk about this week. We're going to talk about Gaza. We're going to talk about Kamala Harris. We're going to talk about how to save the American experiment from the New York Times, an interesting opinion piece, a whole bunch of things. It's fall. Welcome to fall, everyone. I was looking outside today and I'm seeing yellows and reds and all sorts of colors starting to poke through on the leaves. So if you didn't know that it was fall, you do now, because it is just fall everywhere, and especially here in the Northeast, fall is always an exceptionally beautiful season, and we're doing it this year, as usual and as we do. So I'm a little late today, so because I was talking and I didn't do any setup or anything like that. So let me dive right into the headlines. So let me go here and let me do this and let's do this. There we go. All right. So our first story. Oh, let me get rid of these. I did a live show last week in support of our anthology Fantastic Worlds over at Sumud Media, and I had tons of guests and everything, and so everything is still set for tons of guests, and it's just me right now. Like, for example, I don't need to have my name on this because it's just me. Boop, there we go. We already know who I am. So we're going to let's go right into the headlines, though. So the first story I have, this one was sent in from a listener, reader, watcher, and this was about, we'll start from the beginning. if you don't know, and you probably don't, there has been a flotilla, that's these boats here, of boats that have been traveling from Europe to Israel in order to break Israel's blockade of aid to Gaza. There have been ships with humanitarian aid sitting near Gaza, unable to dock because of the Israeli blockade. The goal of the flotilla was ostensibly to bring humanitarian aid and to also break the embargo, to break the blockade. However, not everything is as it seems necessarily. So, in this story, we find out that there was no humanitarian aid on the vessels, the Sumud flotilla, that was arrived and Israel intercepted as it neared Gaza late last week. Now, interestingly enough, most of the narrative has been around the horrible treatment that people on the flotilla have had at the hands of Israeli officials, including Greta Thunberg, who apparently was treated very poorly. That's, if you go to CNN and all this stuff, this is what you'll read. But this article was sent from World Israel News. Now, I'm not necessarily a huge fan of this as a source, so I went hunting, as I always do, to kind of see who else is talking about this. I found this story in the Jerusalem Post. Not my favorite, because it's an Israeli publication, very pro-Israel sort of thing. Not my favorite, but better. However, what really clinched the deal was Al Jazeera. And it says here, Israeli forces have boarded and taken control of the Marionette, the final vessel headed towards Gaza as part of the global Sumud Flotilla, GSF, one of the largest aid missions to attempt to break Israel's blockade of the enclave. The flotilla, made up of at least 44 civilian boats carrying some 500 activists, was first intercepted late on Wednesday, with boats boarded and volunteers detained and taken to Israel. By noon on Thursday, the military said all but one vessel had been secured. On Friday morning, a live-stream video showed Israeli forces forcing their way on board the Polish-flagged Marionette, which reportedly has a crew of 6 and was the last remaining operational vessel of the flotilla. The flotilla organizers posted on X, Marionette, the last remaining boat of the global Sumud flotilla, was intercepted at 10:29 a.m. local time, approximately 42.5 nautical miles from Gaza. Israel has enforced a blockade on Gaza since Hamas took control in 2007. Gaza's residents have largely been trapped in the Palestinian territory since then, with the entry of food, goods, and aid strictly controlled by Israel. It says here, Israel has intercepted all the vessels in the global Sumud flotilla, a convoy carrying humanitarian aid to Gaza, organizers said. The country had vowed to stop the flotilla, claiming the volunteers were trying to breach a lawful naval blockade, but organizers say international law is clear that humanitarian aid should be let through. And then down here it says that the flotilla's voyage has drawn global attention, and the detention of activists has triggered protests in cities including Rome, Buenos Aires, and Istanbul. Those held including climate activist Greta Thunberg, former Barcelona Mayor Adu Colau, and European Parliament member Rima Hassan. In a statement on Friday, the International Committee to Break the Siege of Gaza said some of the detainees from the global Sumud flotilla had begun a hunger strike after being detained by Israeli forces. While the flotilla carried only a symbolic amount of humanitarian aid, organizers said their mission was to establish a maritime corridor into Gaza, where nearly 2 years of war have left the population facing an acute humanitarian crisis. And see, it shows they're leaving from ports in Spain, drone attack near Tunisia, Sicily, and then the final interception here in Gaza in the eastern Mediterranean. It says here that those detained would normally go through a legal process, but Israel's currently under near total shutdown because of the Yom Kippur holiday. That means courts and prisons are not functioning, creating a limbo for activists if they're detained. Another ministry video showed climate activist Greta Thunberg surrounded by soldiers on a boat deck. Several vessels of the Hamas Sumud flotilla have been safely stopped, and their passengers are being transferred to an Israeli port. Greta and her friends are safe and healthy. And it shows the arrests here. That's Greta Thunberg there. This is an Israeli IDF soldier. There she is putting on a hat and coat. All this sort of thing. So, and then it kind of goes through the history of it all. But, yes, so the flotilla then posted that it was not about just bringing aid, but also to establish the corridor. And this is the international video where they said, here's the boat with no humanitarian aid.
One of the vessels, one of the largest vessels to come in this Yom Kippur flotilla. And while we're processing this boat, There's one thing missing, guys. All this aid that they were supposed to bring into Gaza, which explains one thing to me, I'm sure it explains to you, that when we and multiple other countries offered them to take this aid and bring it to the Gazans, we could facilitate its safe arrival, they flat out rejected it. And now we know why, because it was never about bringing aid to Gazans, but it was all about the headlines and the social media followings.
Obviously, Israel has a very specific message that they want to send out about this. And obviously, this social media account is aiding in the promotion of that narrative, all fine and well. It says that another flotilla is now heading towards the Gaza Strip, according to social media posts by the Sumud Flotilla. The Freedom Flotilla Coalition has confirmed that a boat named Conscience departed Italy on Wednesday, carrying around 100 people who describe themselves as activists. The group claims that many of the passengers are also healthcare workers and journalists. Another 8 boats have set sail from Italy nearly a week ago, and according to live tracking over the internet, the 9 ships are currently near the island of Crete. At the same time, the Sumud Flotilla X accounts report that a second flotilla of 45 boats has left the port of Arsuz in Turkey for Gaza, hosting a video to support this. However, it has not yet been officially confirmed whether the boats shown are indeed heading for Gaza. And the National Security Minister, Itamar Ben-Gvir, said that all the participants should be imprisoned. No surprise there. It says, I think they must be kept here in an Israeli prison for a few months so they can smell the scent of the terrorist wing. After all, it can't just be that Netanyahu sends them back to their countries again and again and again, which caused them to return again and again and again. Now, whether you agree with their stand or not, it is an interesting, from a narrative point of view, because I'm always, here at the Cameron Journal, we talk about news narratives a lot. And when you start looking and thinking about narratives, a lot of things start to make sense. From a narrative perspective, obviously, Israel's trying to make the flotilla people look as dumb as humanly possible. And obviously, the flotilla is wanting to show Israel as the evil oppressor who's keeping aid from the Gazans as it has done since 2007. And not wanting to work with Israel in transporting the supposed aid. Obviously, the idea that that they were supposed to be carrying humanitarian aid for Gaza, but weren't really carrying any aid, but instead we're trying to establish a maritime corridor, all this type of thing. The shifting narrative obviously makes them look bad. It makes Israel look much better, like they've just gotten rid of the problem. They've gotten rid of the problem children sort of thing. And this was, as he said, the narrative is this was never about aid. It was entirely about social media headlines and generating a fuss. And that's where, and a lot of people don't understand this about a lot of Israeli foreign policy and a lot of the things they do and the reason why they do them. No one is more acutely aware at how they need to have public opinion, particularly Western public opinion, on Israel's side. Israel is very aware that it is very important for them to keep public opinion on their side. So for them, fighting the propaganda war is probably more important than fighting the actual war on the ground. For the simple fact that they, in order for their military to continue to thrive and have the equipment it needs, and for the payments just to keep coming through, they need Western governments to be on their side. And so for them, making, the pro-Gaza, anti-Israel protesters, flotillas, all this type of thing, look as dumb, greedy, and stupid as possible is in the best interest of Israel. So obviously they're promoting that narrative. Now, here's where I have not looked into. I don't know how consistent the flotilla's messaging was, but the idea that they had to post and clarify what they were doing after being in the water and doing this for 2 months sort of thing, it doesn't look great. I also think it's rather interesting, as a side note, that now that, now that that the White House is occupied by President Trump and all this type of thing, all of a sudden all the Gaza protests and whatnot in this country have seemed to magically disappear. Funny how that works. Anyway, that's just a little sidebar, a little side note. But this is a quite, interesting sort of story. Now, the reason why this person sent this to me was to kind of show how, dumb and silly this whole, protesting against Israel thing sort of is, and, that the Gaza protesters are just silly because, Israel's in the right and Hamas is a terrorist organization, so kind of screw them and all this type of thing. And that's not my position. I think people have to remember, as strange as this sounds, the people of Gaza are held hostage by Hamas as much as people in Israel are, simply for the fact that while Hamas delivers a lot of services, then they've been the de facto government in Gaza for a long time, in a way that they're not in the West Bank. Life under Hamas isn't exactly pleasant either. They were just the only real game in town. And also, the election the Bush administration organized was terrible, and I actually ended up watching a video by Bill Clinton who explained what they did and how Hamas managed to wheedle their way into power. No one gives a terrorist organization political power. It's the dumbest thing anyone's ever done. But, the long story long is that whether you agree with all this, there's a very specific narrative being promoted. And it's the idea, very simply, that Israel is in the right, the protesters are a bunch of whiners, and they, just need to, be oppressed and suppress themselves so Israel can get around the business of its own national security against this long-term terrorist organization type of threat. That's the narrative being put out here. I would say for all these other future potential flotillas, and there have been many before, and there'll be more afterwards, to be very clear on what exactly that you're doing. I understand not wanting to work with Israel on quote-unquote moving this aid and all this type of thing, because Israel has even not allowed the United States military to bring aid into Gaza at different points. We had that floating dock there that eventually fell apart. This has been a whole thing, and Israel's whole program is to completely restrict any movement in and out of Gaza as they basically bomb it to smithereens, so it can eventually be bulldozed over and turned into something else. That's the end game here. People kind of thought that was crazy 6 months ago, but it's quite obvious when you look at the pictures, that's what's going to happen. Is that the present population will be removed in favor of a new population. And probably a lot of new resorts and other things that are, great and wonderful. And where the Palestinians who live there will go and what they will do remains to be seen, especially considering not one of the Arab neighbors really wants them, for a whole other variety of reasons I will not get into at this moment. But that's that story. I love when readers and watchers send in stories, so if you have a story you want me to cover, email me, email@CameronJournal.com. Feel free to send me an email or get at me on social media, and we'll go from there. It's always, I always enjoy looking over stuff and breaking down the news narratives for you. In a bit of media news, Bari Weiss from the Free Press, who made a name for herself for taking her reportage from, I believe it was the New York Times, to Substack and starting her own publication, has been acquired by Paramount Skydance, who just merged together. And they have bought the digital news site Free Press in a $150 million deal, and Bari Weiss is now going to be the CBS News editor-in-chief because CBS was part of the Paramount Skydance merger deal. Yes, big media mergers are always a joy forever. They want to modernize content and the way it connects. Bari Weiss has made a name for herself in being a little too, I wouldn't even say conservative, but maybe not as liberal as a lot of other of the media and this sort of thing. And that has caused a little bit of ruckus in the world. And so they're kind of looking, what's the coverage and whatnot going to be like under the leadership of Barry Weiss, especially given, 60 Minutes, CBS's flagship news program, given even things like Sunday Morning, what the view and perspective will be. Now, for those that are thinking that Barry Weiss is going to turn CBS into some sort of, liberal, conservative bastion in network news, I don't think that's who she is. I mean, she's a lesbian, but I don't think that's who she is. I don't think that's what she's going for. I don't think that's what they want her to do. I think they really want to bring CBS more in line with what they think the median view is in a business that has been bleeding viewers for years. But anyway, there's a little bit of a video. Let's watch.
Company Paramount Global will pay President Donald Trump $16 million to settle his lawsuit over edits made to his 60 Minutes interview with former Vice President Kamala Harris during her presidential campaign. Trump accused Paramount of giving Harris a better answer in the edit of her interview. The network says the interview was edited for time purposes, but not doctored. Paramount Global said in a statement, quote,
"They also released the unedited version.
Of apology or regret." Since taking office, Trump has teased the idea that the Federal Communications Commission could strip CBS News of its license over the matter. Trump's legal team celebrated the settlement, saying it was holding the media accountable. Amid the legal battle, Paramount Global is seeking approval from the Trump administration to merge with Skydance Media. The combined company would be worth $28 billion. The settlement comes after ABC News settled with Trump in a lawsuit over host George Stephanopoulos' comment that the president was, quote, liable for rape. His network will pay $15 million.
And that is the other... I think the biggest change you're going to see probably out of Barry Weiss is you're going to see a lot less criticism of the Trump administration. And that's going to be reverberating across a lot of media because Trump is doing an excellent job of bullying media outlets, particularly media outlets with a lot of lawyers and deep pockets, into not saying things. Like, for instance, with the ABC settlement, George Stephanopoulos wasn't saying anything out of pocket. He was reading a court transcript because Trump was found liable for that in a big judgment that he's already appealed and lost once, sort of thing. But the fact of the matter is that Trump is very sensitive to news narratives. He lives in news narratives, and he watches copious amounts of television. And so when he sees something that he does not like, he's definitely going to push back on it more forcefully than he did in the first term. Richard Nixon wishes he could get away with this. And this putting Barry Weiss in charge of CBS News is certainly going to, I would say, pull back a lot of criticism. It will ostensibly make the news more fair, but what we're really doing is we're exchanging one narrative for another. It's very obvious that I don't think it's going to become a Fox News situation, but you're definitely going to see a lot less of the open criticism that we've gotten used to coming out of a lot of the news networks. And especially given the merger between Paramount and Skydance and everything that's happening, it's going to, there's definitely going to be a change. I'm not a huge fan of Barry Weiss, so I'm not excited about this. I imagine there's probably going to be a pretty big exodus of people from CBS News that are not going to want to stay around to see what Barry Weiss is going to do. But it will definitely be interesting to see how she changes things around at CBS and brings it more in line with what the free press is and was doing. I thought I had. No. I thought I had a. Oh no, I got rid of that tab because it was paid. So that's what's happening here. From a freedom of the press, news media, news narrative perspective, in reporting on the march of authoritarianism and the march of fascism, moving forward, this isn't great. I don't think Barry Weiss is going to be in the pocket of the Trump administration. I do think there's going to be a lot of pressure on her to tone it down a lot and keep a lot of criticism of the administration off the air. And that is exactly what President Trump wants. Speaking of that, I thought this opinion piece, this came out this morning in the New York Times. I thought this was very interesting. It says, How to Save the American Experiment. And I love the 1920s, and this article compares a lot to the 1920s, and I thought this is, it also goes with a book I talk about a lot that I finished reading called The American Midnight, and it was the period between the end of World War I and about 1922 or so. And it was an interesting deep dive into an interesting 3-year period in America's history, and this article kind of builds on that. We'll start reading here. At the outset of the 1920s, a wave of attempted assassinations and political violence crested alongside new barriers to immigration, a campaign of deportations, and a government crackdown on dissenting speech. Sound familiar? America was fresh off a pandemic in which divisive public health measures yielded widespread anger and distrust. Staggering levels of economic inequality underlaid a fast-changing industrial landscape and rapidly evolving racial demographics. Influential voices in the press warned that a crisis of misinformation in the media had wrecked the most basic democratic processes. Again, any of that sound familiar? Even presidential elections eerily converge. In 1920, national frustration over an infirm and aging president helped sweep the Democratic Party out of the White House in favor of a Republican candidate, offering the nostalgic promise of returning America to greatness, or at least to normalcy. A faltering President Woodrow Wilson gave way to Warren Harding and one-party control over all 3 branches of the federal government. Yet what is striking about the 1920s is that, unlike the German interwar crisis, America's dangerous decade led not to fascism and the end of democracy, but to the New Deal and the Civil Rights era. Across the sequence of emergencies that followed, the Great Depression, eventually World War II, the United States ushered in an era of working-class political empowerment and prosperity. The nation ended Jim Crow in the South and established free speech with court-backed protections for the first time in its history. The story of how Americans built a new infrastructure for modern democracy does not offer a step-by-step map for 2025, but it does just a way out of our destructive spiral. The fiery intellectual W.E.B. Du Bois and the young columnist Walter Lippmann were among the first to grasp a core feature of modern mass politics. Information and a crisis of trust in the news had deformed American political life in the aftermath of World War I, just as they do in our current age of media disarray. Du Bois, the brilliant black writer and editor who founded the NAACP in 1909, watched as propaganda campaigns, some led by the very newspapers that should have been the wellsprings of an informed citizenry, whipped politics into frenzied race riots. In places ranging from Elaine, Arkansas to Washington, D.C., the angry rioters of what came to be known as the Red Summer of 1919 ripped through black communities, killing hundreds. Lippmann, who was emerging as America's most influential liberal journalist, understood information and propaganda to be the fundamental democratic problem under conditions of a mass population and a mass press. The crisis of democracy, he wrote, was in its essence a crisis in journalism. The distance between what he called the world outside and the pictures in our heads afforded vast power to those who managed information flows. A full century before today's distorting power of the internet and social media, Lippmann wrote that the sheer scale of modern life separated citizens from the information required for self-rule. The stream of news that reaches the public, he discerned, was democracy's most glaring vulnerability. And that's even worse now, because so much of it is communicated through a headline, a meme, a picture, something a friend told you. It's not the way it was. We're not all watching the same evening news broadcast and getting a half-hour news every day and that's it. No, it's even more diffuse than that. And when you start talking to people, and I do this a lot, where I listen to the bits of and parts that people did get and did hear, I'm like, okay, you have 5 fragments. Let me tie all that together for you. And they're amazed because they haven't. If you're watching this, you're not this person. But they haven't really figured, because there's so much. And every day it's something new. It's something different. And so it's more than any normal person who has bills to pay, animals to feed, children to look after can begin to hope to keep up with. Anyway, deep inequality came hand in hand with widespread economic dislocation for working people. Giant industrial behemoths like Ford, General Electric, and U.S. Steel promised new affluence in the mass consumer economy, but the scientific management of factories and farms produced economic vulnerabilities for workers. Old mechanisms of working-class power proved as outmatched by mass production as unions today seem to be overwhelmed by virtual work, the gig economy, and generative AI. In some respects, 1920s America was much farther down the road of political distrust and internal hatred than we find ourselves today. Formal state-sponsored racial subordination in the form of Jim Crow blocked political participation by most black people in the South. Political violence reached heights not seen since. A bombing campaign by hard-left anarchists roiled the country. Mail bombs were targeted at roughly 30 of the nation's most prominent figures. A horse-drawn wagon filled with dynamite and loaded shrapnel blew up on Wall Street in 1920, where its damage can still be seen. True, you can still see the pockmarks from the shrapnel in the columns in front of the stock exchange. State repression at the opening of the 1920s was also far-reaching. Hundreds of political prisoners, including the presidential candidate Eugene Debs, molded in federal prisons, many of them serving long sentences under wartime espionage and sedition acts for speaking their minds. States passed sweeping new laws prohibiting advocacy of crime, sabotage, or violence as a means of accomplishing political change, and used the laws to prosecute hundreds of people. Courts offered no relief. Until the early 1930s, the Supreme Court had never once used the First Amendment to block the imprisonment of dissenters. Many Americans simply abandoned politics in the 1920s, surrendering to the long odds stacked against decent change. A younger generation led by the jazz-age celebrity F. Scott Fitzgerald announced that it had grown tired of great causes like war and social uplift. But beneath the surface of the Roaring Twenties, a generation of social innovators began experiments that laid the basis for a democratic flourishing. New organizations like the American Civil Liberties Union sprang up to defend jailed opponents of World War I and radical dissenters. The still fledgling NAACP, led by James Weldon Johnson, started an anti-lynching campaign in Congress where it failed, and in the press where it was much more successful. The super lawyer Clarence Darrow threw himself into the defense of First Amendment freedoms, John Scopes in Tennessee, and black people's freedom to live where they liked, Aussie and Sweet in Detroit. But a second development shaped the era in a more profound way. In 1922, a handsome Harvard dropout named Charles Garland gave away his $1 million inheritance. Citing the injustice of vast economic inequalities and crediting both Jesus and the Russian Revolution, Garland took money, derived from what is now the Citibank empire, and gave it to the muckraking writer Upton Sinclair and ACLU founder Roger Baldwin. Those two men used the windfall to establish the first liberal philanthropic foundation of the age, the American Fund for Public Service, or the Garland Fund as it was sometimes known. The modern income tax enacted in 1913 created unprecedented subsidies for charitable and social welfare organizations. Garland's original $1 million, doubling in the boom stock market of the 1920s, amounted to nearly $40 million in 2025. Scaled to the size of an economy that today is more than 20 times as large as it was in 1922, we might say that the Garland Fund was equivalent to a 2020s foundation with $800 million to give away. Distrustful of perpetual foundations, Baldwin and Sinclair committed to a spend-down structure that accelerated the money's impact, and over the subsequent 2 decades, the same length Bill Gates chose this past May for his own spend-down at the Gates Foundation, the fund invested in causes designed to spark democratic renewal in America. Dozens of ambitious 1920s startups received precious incubator funding. Beneficiaries included heterodox unions, innovative publishers, and media outlets, as well as iconoclastic civil rights organizations. The fund sponsored research, education, and news sources that would be outside the influence of the wealthy few. It supported black civil rights, helping to start the campaign that culminated decades later in Brown versus Board of Education. The fund eschewed demoralizing cycles of outrage at the oppressions of the age. It aimed instead to renew the fundamental institutions that shaped everyday people's lives, structured their interests, and animated their dreams. Above all, that meant supporting an emerging new model of the economic organization, the industrial union, as a novel way to connect large numbers of Americans to power and prosperity in the mass production economy. And then it gets into unionization. Then down here, and more about the Garland Fund, down here. No, too far. Given the successes of change backed by conservative foundations, there are figures on the right who worry about the Trump administration's threats to stamp out foundations that have been sources of inspiration for a century. The promises to strip liberal foundations of their tax status and investigate George Soros-gifted funding, renewed after the assassination of Charlie Kirk, come out of an old playbook, one put together 100 years ago by the Coolidge administration to eliminate the Garland Fund's tax-exempt status. Such efforts risk being badly counterproductive for reasons both conservatives and liberals understand. Civil society institutions like the Garland Fund have been a source for creative democratic renewal. Freed of the short-term constraints of state officials and of political parties, civil society organizations can exercise experimental agenda-setting power in moments of crisis for existing institutions. For all the talk of red lines and points of no return, the modern United States has had democratic crises and authoritarian turmoil before. The language of break glass, fire alarm emergencies looks at our increasingly brittle existing modes of political organization and cannot see beyond them. But the way through will be to craft new modes of renewal adequate to the landscape of the world in which we find ourselves, forms analogous to the industrial union of the 20s, and perhaps fueled by the generative civil society engine of the now vast nonprofit world. A century ago, in the forgotten history of a decade just barely out of living memory, we found pathways to a better place. The answer to how all this ends turns on experiments we have only barely begun to launch. This is the type of article that I knew about some of this stuff, but I didn't know it. Does that make sense? Like, it was one of the, like, oh, okay, that's how this works. I get that. Yeah, I know about that history. Yes, okay. But then it puts it all together in such a way that you're kind of like, oh, okay. Like, yeah, I see how this could be a thing. And could be a potential off-ramp to all of this. The more and more I find out about the 1920s, the more and more I find they're so similar to what we have now. It's actually a bit frightening and shocking. I write my 1920s mystery detective series, I.G. Farben, and which begins in 1925. And the more and more I learn, the more and more I try to add the more patina of that stuff. And and I like to add in more of this kind of political upheaval and turmoil and all this sort of thing. It's a very interesting time. It's so analogous to now, but the idea that what we really need is the hard work of civic institutions, democratic renewal, getting people active, setting agendas for how we want to live in this country is incredibly prescient. And I wanted to highlight this because this is the first time, and this is from John Fabian Witt. He's the author of The Radical Fund, How a Band of Visionaries and $1 Million Upended America. This is the type of conversation we need to have now. This is where the focus should be. We cannot stay in this politics of division forever, and we won't forever. Eventually we will break through. But this is the conversation that's absolutely worth having right now. And I honor Mr. Witt because I wish I had written this book, you know, sort of thing. Instead, I wrote about millennials, and America's Lost Generation is out now. If you haven't picked up a copy of America's Lost Generation, I highly recommend you do so, CameronJournal.com. Yeah, it's, it's on the New York Times in the opinion column. Please go read this. It's so valuable and important. Want to move on to the big story of the week, and that is the ICE agent raiding a South Shore apartment complex, and Trump saying Chicago could become a military training ground. There's a video.
Hundreds taking over an intersection where a surge of Border Patrol agents were seen over the weekend.
We saw over the weekend how ICE agents shamelessly occupied the streets of downtown and detained fellow residents.
ICE out now, no debate.
The group standing here down the way from Trump Tower, they say to stand up for the community.
And it's ridiculous that our tax dollars are going towards these types of raids when it could be funding healthcare, housing, and other issues and needs of the community here in Chicago.
The emergency protest follows this past weekend's surge in immigration enforcement. Dozens of armed federal agents spotted downtown, detaining multiple people.
What I was learning in history class, I'm seeing it now in the streets with ICE detaining legal immigrants and treating them like they're nothing.
President Donald Trump says the uptick in federal operations in the Chicago area is about getting dangerous criminals off the streets. The president now raising the stakes for Chicago. During a meeting with military leaders and Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, Trump calling Chicago an unsafe place that he plans to straighten out.
It's a war from within. I told Pete we should use some of these dangerous cities as training grounds for our military.
Sending troops into cities thinking that that's some sort of proving ground for war, or that indeed there's some sort of internal war going on in the United States is just, frankly, inane.
As for the protesters here today, they say as these operations continue to increase, so will their efforts until ICE is out of Chicago.
So, yes, as we know, there's been National Guard troops and ICE agents set into Chicago and Portland. It also says here, that video was more about the reaction protests. What really started things off is that This is, what was the date on this? From October 1st, last week. Immigration and Customs Enforcement agents raided a South Shore apartment building overnight as the city braces for possible military deployment, which arrived. My building is shaking, so I'm like, what's that? Then I look out the window. It's a Black Hawk helicopter, says witness Dr. Ali Muhammad. Wednesday morning, DHS officials said in a statement, in the early morning hours of September 30th, 2025, allied federal law enforcement agencies with CBP, FBI, and ATF executed an enforcement operation in Chicago's South Shore area, a location known to be frequented by the Tren de Aragua members and their associates. Some of the targeted subjects are believed to be involved in drug trafficking and distribution, weapons crimes, and immigration violators. DHS said 37 people were arrested in a building of 900. ABC7 spoke to Pertishu Fisher, a woman who lives in the building. She said ICE agents took everyone in the building, including her, and asked questions later. They just treated us like we were nothing, Fisher said. Fisher said she came out the hallway of her apartment complex on the corner of 75th and South Shore Drive in her nightgown around 10 p.m. Monday, only to find armed ICE agents yelling police. It was scary because I'd never had a gun in my face, Fisher said. They asked my name and my date of birth and asked me, did I have any warrants, and I told them no, I didn't. Fisher said she was handcuffed before being released around 3 a.m., and she was told that if anyone had any kind of warrant out for them, even if it was unrelated to immigration, they would not be released. They like piling us all up in the back on the other side. It was no room to move nowhere. Citizen app video captured the chaotic scene, and neighbors say there were dozens of ICE agents. As I got to my unit to stick my key in the door, I was grabbed by an officer, and I said, what's going on? What's going on? He never actually told me. He said I was being detained, said Alicia Brooks. Neighbors like Ebony Watson say they ducked for cover as they heard several flashbangs. They were terrified. The kids were crying. People were screaming. They looked very distraught. I was out there crying when I seen the little girl come around the corner because they was bringing the kids down too, and had them zip-tied to each other, Watson said. That's all I kept asking. What's the morality? Where's the human? One of them literally laughed. He was standing right there. He said, F them kids. Watson said trucks and military-style vans were used to separate parents from their children. Other neighbors said agents destroyed property to get in the building. They had a big 15-inch chainsaw with a round blade on it cutting this fence down, witness Darrell Ballard. We're under siege. We're being invaded by our own military. Marley Sanders' boyfriend was detained, Sanders said. They had the black people in one van, the immigrants in the other van, Sanders said. The FBI confirmed on Tuesday morning that they were helping U.S. Border Patrol carry out a targeted immigration enforcement operation in the area, adding that they have been supporting these efforts at the U.S. Attorney General's direction. Border Patrol Commander-at-Large Gregory Bovino with his officers spoke on the ground in an exclusive interview with News Nation. And then it goes into that whole thing, and that's the end of that. Obviously, there have been protests in reaction to this building being raided, and a lot of attention on it as well. There was also a story today that said National Guard troops are traveling from Texas to Illinois Monday, which is today. I saw that right before I started the show this evening. I think it's going down in Chicago. I think that's where things are about to get weird, is in Chicago. I think Portland is whatever. Things are about to get weird in Chicago, and I will definitely be keeping an eye on this story. As we bring the show to a close, former guest of the Cameron Journal podcast, Jose Nino, posted a very interesting article that I want to talk about quickly, and that is his complaint about changing demographics in Florida and Texas and why the Republican Party cannot be trusted. It says here that international migration has been the primary driver of these changes, which he goes through the lack of white people in Florida and Texas. And it says here that in 2024, Florida had the highest rate of international migration in the nation. Natural increase has also favored younger, more diverse populations, as Hispanic families maintain higher birth rates than non-Hispanic whites. These demographic projections suggest that trends will continue through at least 2050, with Texas Hispanics expected to comprise 42.7% of the population by mid-century, while non-Hispanic whites declined to 28.6%. The scope of immigration, both legal and illegal, feeding this transformation is massive. Florida hosts approximately 5 million foreign-born residents as of 2023, representing 22% of the state's population. While the majority have legal status, Florida maintains between 590 and 770,000 illegal immigrants, representing the third largest illegal immigration population nationally. Texas hosts 5.5 million foreign-born residents, 17.9% of the population, including an estimated 1.7 million illegal aliens, nearly 3 times Florida's illegal alien population, and 5.6% of the state's total population. The demographic transformation of Florida and Texas becomes even more damning when considered alongside the Republican Party's comprehensive political control of these states. This is not a case of Democrats implementing open borders policies over Republican objections. This is Republican-enabled mass migration occurring under complete GOP dominance. And it also goes on to say, and the main point of this is the thing I've always said about immigration. And it says here, the agriculture industry has also contributed a record $41.3 million to Republicans versus $18.5 million to Democrats. Tyson Foods affiliates alone contributed 886,000 in 2024 cycle, with approximately 80% going to Republicans. This is particularly egregious given that Tyson employs 42,000 foreign-born workers and has stated it would like to employ another 42,000 immigrants if we could find them. To say the Republican Party is fully captured by business interests would be an understatement. The evidence is overwhelming. The Republican Party cannot and will not defend the demographic integrity of America. Decades of Republican trifecta control in Florida and Texas have produced demographic transformations that would make pro-open borders liberals blush. The party's complete capture by corporate interests dependent on cheap immigrant labor ensures that the campaign rhetoric about border security and immigration enforcement remains nothing more than political theater designed to pacify the electoral constituencies while maintaining the flow of foreign workers to their donors' demand. And that's why you're never going to solve immigration in this country. That's it. As long as corporate America is stuck on the teat of cheap labor, you're stuck. You can never solve immigration. Ever. And that goes for tech companies hiring H-1Bs. That goes for Tyson Food looking for people to process meat. That's the whole game right there. Now, it's always entertaining for someone with this name to be complaining about immigration, but still, even so, that's the whole game. It's as is so often the case in this country, the story is always economic. Where's the money going? Because the reality is nothing in this country moves without a dollar attached to it. Nothing. Nothing moves without a dollar attached to it. And so you have this terrible situation where you're never going to really ever solve the immigration problem. The only way to solve this would be to have a large, inexpensive, robust guest worker program where you start tracking these people. Otherwise, they're just going to continue to come and go because the demand is there. This is basic supply and demand, something Republicans should understand because they're always lecturing the rest of us about it. I didn't want to spend a lot of time on this, but it was an interesting kind of thing. It says here that anything short of fundamental systemic change is just rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic. The time for working within a captured Republican Party has passed. The demographic transformation of America's two largest Republican states under comprehensive GOP control represents the most damning indictment possible of the party's commitment to its stated principles. Republicans can't be trusted because they have already proven through their governing record in Florida and Texas that they will sacrifice America's demographic future for corporate donor dollars. Florida and Texas prove that under Republican rule, prosperity is nothing more than camouflage for the demographic displacement of whites. If that is something you're concerned with. I'm not terribly, but he is. It's always just nice for someone inside the Republican Party to complain about something the Republicans are responsible for. Usually we always do that about Democrats. I thought it was a nice change, on top of further reinforcing the idea that immigration primarily is an economic demand issue and nothing else. And until you solve one, you will not solve the other. Now, Kamala Harris is on her book tour, which is always a lot of fun, and I wanted to play some fun videos from her recent appearance in San Francisco. So it's just basically kind of video reacts to close out the show because we're almost done. But anyway, she's so entertaining.
Are out there doing national security secrets and warplanes on signal. We would get our asses out of bed and go to a skiff or literally go to a secure room to talk about national secrets. And these guys are too lazy. They just want to sit there and do like this. But now that I have a phone.
I think a lot of people have already forgotten about the great, arranging the bombing over signal sort of thing. And I think it's funny that she brought that, she brings that back up. These videos have been posted by people all weekend, which has been a lot of fun. And there's this other one that was also equal. No, that's not that one. Nope, that's, yeah. We're going to save that for next week. There's been a couple of these videos kind of running around of her just saying funny stuff. There's another video of her, actually I might be able to find it on this account if they have it. But there's several entertaining, funny videos about just things that she said on this book tour. She's not running for anything. She's not in office. And woohoo! Kamala Harris Uncorked is fun. But here's kind of the meta thing about this is that really it's about, I think the big story is, I think she's expressing the energy the Democrats want right now. They want someone who's loud, who's calling it out, who is, out there doing something, saying something, being something, providing the leadership that Hakeem Jeffries and Chuck Schumer cannot bother to do. Not that she says she's running in 2028, but if I were planning on running in 2028, if I were her, that would be the way to do it. But I think with her being able to articulate the popular Democratic rage, that puts her in a really great position.
There's so many forces that are full-time spreading hate. Mm-hmm. We really do have to really think about love. Amen. And think about it in terms of whatever that is.
I mean, there's just like I said, there's, obviously she already has, so much of a following and all this type of thing, but there's just so all these videos just kind of running around and that have been posted all weekend long from different people everywhere she goes. It's the early 2024 campaign energy all over again, and love that for her. But I think, but the most important thing is, I think it's also what the Democratic Party needs right now. Not only is she criticizing the party through her book, which I said last week is very important, and it is, but she's also expressing the popular rage of the Democrats. And I think that puts her in a fantastic position for 2028. And she still is the polling frontrunner, so not a bad position to be in. This video is super short. It's a CNN clip. And I want to close on this because it is directionally correct when it comes to the Democratic Party today. And I think the fact that Kamala Harris is already leaning into this, I think is good. Let's watch.
Compared them to Abercrombie and Fitch, a ghost brand. What do you think?
I think that, he's right that we need more unapologetic Democrats, but it's more than that. The Democratic brand is two things right now. It's a lot of things, but it's both risk-averse and it's very, very finger-waggy. So all of our politicians are incredibly risk-averse, so they're not out there taking risks or trying to do new things. They're playing it very, very safe. Even as much as I love Kamala Harris, and I thought she did well on her campaign, she was very risk-averse during all of that. But on the other side of that, while they're being risk-averse, they're also just purity testing everybody and finger-wagging them. I'm a young dude. I like a little bit of edge in my politicians. I think most young dudes like an edgy politician, not somebody who's out there being, super scripted and tested and everything. So all this comes together to create an environment where I had a young friend the other day who is pretty liberal say that the Democratic Party feels quote unquote suffocating at times. And I think that's a good way to put it.
It's that and academic. A lot of times the simplicity is missing in the message.
What Bill?
He compared them to Abercrombie and Fitch, a ghost.
And weirdly enough, I think with Kamala Harris standing up and cursing, talking about phones, talking about scandals, calling out the Trump administration, all this type of thing, I think weirdly enough, she is what the party needs right now. More of that. Now, I agree with him. The Democratic Party is too risk-averse. It is much too luxury and finger-waggy. It's all of those things. And it's too academic because it tends to be ran by coastal liberal elites from a very few amount of places. It's not even location diverse. Hire some nice people from the Midwest if you must. That was the one thing about Tim Walz, that Minnesota energy. But, the reality of the situation is the Democratic Party brand is very toxic right now. And oddly enough, I feel like this book tour is the beginning of the rehab special. And I think as much as Democratic Party insiders don't like that Kamala Harris kind of called everybody out in her book, that's what the party needs right now. It just does. And I like this guy, though. Adam Mockler. I follow him. He's the guy from Midas Touch. I like him. I like him a lot. We love the energy. So, anyway, that's the news hour tonight, everyone. Thank you all so much for watching. My name is Cameron Cowan. Please visit me online at CameronJournal.com. I do this show every Monday at 7 p.m. Eastern Time, and you also can rewatch it on my YouTube channel, youtube.com/@CameronCowan. You can find me at CameronJournal.com. You can also find me on Substack, CameronJournal.substack.com, for select things from the Cameron Journal. Don't forget to sign up for the newsletter. It's the best thing. because I bring you headlines and stuff every week, and you also get all the stuff that I do, interviews, the news hour, my other podcast, The Living Joke, which is like a morning zoo thing, which is absolutely insane. All that stuff delivered right to your inbox. So thank you for watching. Thank you for the person that just liked. I love you forever. I will see you next time on the Cameron Journal Newshour. Talk soon. Bye-bye.